What happens when the most feared crime lord in Montreal meets the one woman his broken little girl refuses to let go of, a debt-drowned, overlooked hospital cleaner who just needed to survive the month? Lena Marsh had spent 26 years being the kind of person rooms forgot. Not ugly, not unkind, just invisible in the particular way that happens to women who take up more space than the world has decided they deserve. She was 5'3" and weighed close to 280 on a good day, with soft brown eyes and hands that were always slightly chapped from industrial cleaning solution. She wore her dark hair in a thick braid down her back because she'd learned long ago that loose hair and hospital corridors didn't mix. She worked the overnight shift at Hôpital Maisonneuve-Rosemont, pushing a cart through fluorescent hallways, scrubbing floors that would be dirty again by morning. She did her job without complaint, without fanfare, without anyone ever really seeing her do it at all. The eviction notice had been slipped under her apartment door on a Tuesday. Third one in 4 months. Her landlord, a thin man named Gerard, who smelled of cigarettes and entitlement, had been incrementally raising her rent since the building was purchased by a numbered corporation the previous spring. Lena had stretched every dollar she had. She'd stopped buying meat, she'd cancelled the internet, and used the library's Wi-Fi in her lunch breaks. She'd taken on a second job cleaning offices downtown on weekday afternoons, before her hospital shift began, running from one building to the next on the metro with her lunch in a Ziploc bag. Feet aching before the real work even started. Her mother had passed in February from a stroke, and the funeral costs had swallowed the last of the small emergency fund Lena had spent 3 years building. There was no family safety net. There was no one to call. There was just the envelope on the floor, the number inside it, and the very specific silence of a person realizing they have run completely out of options. Her supervisor, a brisk Haitian woman named Claudette, who had a soft spot for Lena she disguised as mild exasperation, pulled her aside during break one night. She'd heard something through the domestic placement network her sister ran out of Rosemont. A private client. Urgent. Residential position, full board, cash weekly. The kind of money that made Lena set down her coffee cup. It's not a regular household, Claudette said, choosing her words carefully. The man is private. The little girl has had 4 caregivers in 8 weeks. 3 quit. 1 left in tears and wouldn't say why. How old is the child? 3. Almost 4. Lena thought about the eviction notice. She thought about the $800 she currently had in the world. I'll go, she said. She took the address written on the back of a pharmacy receipt and did not sleep before her interview. The property was in Outremont, set back from the street behind a stone wall and a wrought iron gate that looked like it had been imported directly from another century. Security cameras nested discreetly in the mature oaks lining the drive. 2 men in dark coats stood at the gatehouse in the cold November air, breath fogging, hands visible, posture communicating clearly that this was not a place you wandered into by accident. Lena arrived on the number 80 bus and walked the last 2 blocks in her good coat, the one she saved for job interviews, a charcoal wool that was slightly too small across the shoulders and had a button missing at the third eyelet that she'd covered by angling the lapel. Her portfolio bag held a folded resume and 3 reference letters from previous employers. She was the most prepared she had ever been for anything in her life, and she was terrified. The guard who checked her name against a list on a tablet did not smile. He spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder. The gate opened. She walked up the stone drive past a bare-branched garden that in summer must have been extraordinary and rang the bell at the front entrance. The door was opened almost immediately by a man built like a defensive lineman, face expressionless, dark suit immaculate. He led her through a foyer with 16-foot ceilings and a chandelier that probably cost more than her building, down a hallway lined with framed art that Lena was fairly certain was not decorative reproduction, and into a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace that was actually burning. She was told to wait. She waited. She was standing with her hands clasped in front of her when the door opened and Dominic Carreño walked in. He was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she'd expected. Tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from something harder than bone. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat, a watch on his left wrist that Lena could not have named but understood instinctively to be extraordinary. He was 41 years old, though he carried it in the particular way of men who have never once in their adult lives been without authority. Which is to say, he didn't look his age so much as he looked ageless in a way that was faintly unsettling. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at her, not through her the way people usually did, at her. His dark eyes moved over her face, her coat, her hands. "You're the placement from Claudette Bernard's referral," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Lena Marsh." He folded his arms. The last 4 people who held this position, he said, were experienced, credentialled, and highly recommended. My daughter Éva rejected all of them. The 3rd one she bit. The 4th she locked in the coat closet for 40 minutes before anyone realized what had happened. Lena blinked. How did a 3-year-old lock someone in a closet? "She's resourceful," Dominic said, without a trace of humor. What Claudette's message said was that you're steady, that you don't rattle. "I've cleaned the psychiatric ward on nights for 2 years, Lena said. "I've seen a great many things." Something moved through his expression, not quite amusement, more like recalibration. He opened his mouth to say something further when a sound detonated from somewhere above them. A shriek of such operatic intensity that Lena felt it in her sternum, followed immediately by the rapid percussion of small feet on hardwood. And then Éva Carreño appeared in the doorway. She was tiny and incandescent with rage. Thick dark curls, her father's jaw in miniature, a white nightgown she'd apparently been dressed in for bed. Despite the fact that it was 4 in the afternoon, she had a wooden puzzle piece in each hand and the expression of someone who had been catastrophically wronged. She skidded to a stop when she saw Lena. The man behind her, a younger aide who'd been trying to intercept her and failing, hovered in the doorway looking genuinely afraid. Éva stared at Lena. Lena looked back at her. Neither of them moved. Then Éva lifted one of the puzzle pieces and hurled it. It caught Lena squarely on the collarbone with a crack that made the aide wince. Dominic stepped forward. Lena didn't step back. She didn't make a sound. She absorbed the hit with a slight exhale and then, slowly, because her knees were not especially grateful for the cold stone floors, she lowered herself down until she was sitting on the rug at Éva's eye level. It was not graceful. It was not elegant, but it was immediate and it was deliberate, and Éva seemed to understand both things. The little girl's face did something complicated. Lena looked at the remaining puzzle piece still clutched in Éva's fist. "That was a very good throw," she said, her voice quiet and matter-of-fact. "What are you working on?" She nodded toward the piece. Éva's chin wobbled. She was fighting it, fighting whatever was underneath the fury, and Lena recognized that particular battle from the inside out. "Is it the one with the horses?" Lena asked, because I'd never been good at the ones with the horses. The colors all run together. The bottom lip went. The puzzle piece fell. And then Éva, the child who had terrorized 4 credentialled professionals in 8 weeks, walked across the room and put both her small hands on Lena's soft cheeks and looked at her for a long moment from 2 inches away, the way children do when they are deciding something fundamental about another person. Then she pressed her forehead against Lena's forehead. It was not a hug. It was something more serious than a hug. It was a verdict. Dominic Carreño stood perfectly still in the center of his own sitting room. His aide had gone motionless in the doorway. Nobody breathed. Lena wrapped her arms around the little girl, gently, and felt Éva's whole body let go of something it had been carrying for a very long time. The crying, when it came, was not the violent storm of before. It was a smaller, exhausted kind, the kind that comes after. The kind that means it's finally safe to stop fighting. Dominic watched the woman on his floor hold his daughter, this stranger in a second-hand coat who had not flinched when his child threw something at her chest, who had simply sat down on the ground like it was the most natural thing in the world. His throat did something inconvenient. He turned and looked at the fireplace for a moment. Behind him, very quietly, he heard himself say, "Cancel the remaining interviews. Offer her whatever she asks." Éva's mother, Dominic's wife of 6 years, had died 14 months earlier, an arteriovenous malformation, a tangle of blood vessels in the brain. A thing that had been there her whole life waiting, had ruptured on an ordinary Saturday morning. Here, one moment. Gone before the ambulance arrived. Éva had been 2 years old enough to feel the disappearance but not to name it. Old enough to know that something that had been warm was now permanently cold. The grief had surfaced in the child as rage, as pure primal refusal. She screamed at rooms, she scattered things. She could not be reasoned with, bribed, redirected, or contained. Every professional who came into her orbit with their techniques and their expertise and their careful management strategies had encountered the wall of her fury and eventually crumbled against it. What none of them had understood, what Lena grasped in the first 30 seconds on the floor, was that Éva was not difficult. Éva was drowning. And what a drowning child needs is not a flotation device deployed at professional distance. It's someone who will actually get in the water. Lena moved into the East guest suite the following day. It was the largest room she had ever slept in, with a queen bed so well made it felt like sinking into something forgiving. She lay awake the first night cataloguing the quality of the ceiling plaster and reminding herself that this was temporary, that she was here to do a job, that the number in the envelope Dominic's aide had slid across the kitchen counter that afternoon was real. By the end of the first week, she and Éva had established a language. Éva showed Lena her puzzles, her books, the elaborate city she'd constructed in her room from wooden blocks and pieces of cardboard and one theatrical velvet curtain she'd somehow liberated from a guest room rod. Lena took it seriously. She added roads. She consulted on zoning. She imported a small plastic cow from the toy bin and declared it the mayor. Éva named the cow Biscuit. And from that moment forward, the entire city revolved around the mayor's schedule. Dominic heard his daughter laughing on a Thursday evening. Really laughing, unguarded, genuine, the belly laugh of a child who had forgotten briefly to be sad. He was standing in the hallway outside her room, still in his suit from a meeting with the Bertrand crew that had run late and left him with a headache and a legal problem. He'd meant to look in on her before she slept. He stood at the door and listened instead. Through the gap he could see Lena seated on the floor in a floral dress that had seen better days, holding the wooden cow above her head and performing what appeared to be a mayoral press conference in a voice that was somehow simultaneously formal and absurd. Éva was on her stomach on the rug, kicking her feet, howling with the particular joy of a child who has found exactly the thing they needed. Dominic stood in the hallway for longer than he intended. He began to notice other things. The way Lena moved through the house without asking for things, quietly solving problems that had gone unsolved for over a year. The way she learned the names of every person on his security detail by the end of the first week and asked after their families. The way she made food, not elaborate, not showy, but the kind of food that made people feel specifically taken care of. Beef and barley soup on a cold Sunday, butter tarts, because she'd found out that his head of security, a taciturn man named Rourke, had grown up in Ontario and hadn't had one since his mother died. Rourke had eaten 3 and gone uncharacteristically quiet. "She bakes for the guards," Dominic observed one evening, standing at the island in the kitchen where Lena was rolling pastry dough with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. "A full guard is a focused guard," she said, not looking up. He found himself standing at the island longer than the conversation required. One night, he came in late, past midnight, after a negotiation with a rival crew from Laval that had gone on until 11 and required the kind of patient menace that exhausted him in a way nothing else did. To find the kitchen smelling of cardamom and warm sugar. Lena was at the counter in a dressing gown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for the first time he'd seen, making something small and golden in a cast-iron pan. He stopped in the doorway. She startled. "I couldn't sleep," she said, immediately self-conscious in the particular way she sometimes was when she became aware of how she looked in a space like this one, in a house like this one. "I thought I'd make Éva something warm for her breakfast." "I hope I'm not." He crossed the kitchen and sat down at the island without being invited, which surprised her enough that she stopped apologizing. "What are you making?" he said. "Maple and cardamom financiers. They're very small cakes," she said, slightly flustered. "My grandmother made them. She was from Chicoutimi. She used to say that any problem that couldn't be solved by a small cake was a problem that wasn't ready to be solved yet." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "What problem are you trying to solve tonight?" She looked down at the pan. "A lot of things," she said quietly. He didn't push. He sat at the island, and she finished the financiers in silence that was not uncomfortable, and she set 3 of them in front of him on a small plate, and he ate all 3 without speaking, and then he said simply, "Your grandmother was right." It was 3 weeks later that the threat arrived. Lena was returning from a Saturday afternoon walk with Éva in Park Beaubien. Dominic had insisted on a security shadow, and she'd accepted it without protest, which had impressed Rourke considerably. When a man appeared from between 2 parked cars and spoke her name, he was slight and sharp-featured, with the particular energy of someone who was used to being overlooked and had decided to weaponize it. His name was Thierry, which she recognized a moment too late. The man who'd lent her money the year before, when her mother's care costs had spiraled and she'd been desperate enough to take a short-term loan from a source she knew even then she shouldn't trust. Rourke was 10 feet behind her. Éva was holding her hand. Thierry leaned in close. "I know where you're working," he said. "I know whose house you're sleeping in. You've been ignoring my calls. That's disrespectful." "I've been paying you back," Lena said steadily, though her heart was going at twice its normal rate, every month, as agreed. "The agreement has changed," he said. She heard the smile in it. "You have access, Lena. Access. I can sell. Guard rotations. Entry points. Which nights the boss is out of the house. You get me that by next Friday, and your debt disappears. If you come near me again," she said, very quietly, "I will call the police." He looked at Éva, who was pressed against Lena's side, watching him with enormous dark eyes. He smiled. "You do that." Then he was gone. Lena carried Éva the rest of the way home on her hip, feeling the little girl's arms tighten around her neck, and breathed through the particular terror of knowing that the thing you most want to protect has just been looked at like a bargaining chip. She did not eat dinner. She did not sleep. She spent 3 days moving through the house on autopilot, holding Éva so often and so carefully that the child eventually looked up at her and said, with the directness only toddlers possess, "You're squeezing me, Lena." She loosened her arms and made herself smile. "I know, sweetheart. I'm just very happy to see you." Dominic found her on the 4th night. She was sitting in the armchair in Éva's room, watching the child sleep in the ambient light from the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, and she was crying so quietly that she almost managed to convince herself she wasn't doing it at all. He was in the doorway. She didn't hear him come in. He moved with the silence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where silence was necessary. And when she became aware of him, she had already been seen. "Lena," he said. "Not a question." She shook her head once. She would not do this. She would not put this on him. She was already planning her exit, had already begun composing the letter in her head, the apology, the explanation that she needed to leave for Éva's safety, because she had brought something dangerous to his door without knowing it, and she would not, could not. He crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched in front of the armchair, putting himself below her eyeline. It was the same thing she'd done with Éva on the first day. She registered this through the tears. She was not quite crying, and something cracked open in the middle of her chest. "Tell me," he said. His voice was very quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't asking, exactly, but isn't commanding either. Just waiting. She told him. All of it. The loan, her mother's illness, the missed payments, the park, what Thierry had asked for, what he'd implied about Éva. She told him she was planning to leave. She told him she would never, not for any amount of money, not under any threat, give anyone information that could put his daughter in danger. She told him she was sorry for bringing this to his house. When she stopped talking, Dominic was silent for a long moment, and he reached out and took both her hands in his. His were large and warm, and had a thin scar along the left knuckle that she had never asked about. "You came here with a hole in your coat," he said, "and you've been holding this house together with both hands since the first morning." He paused. "You are not leaving. You are the only thing that has made my daughter laugh in 14 months, and I would rebuild this entire city before I let someone use you against her." He stood. "Don't pack anything," he said. "Get some sleep." Rourke had located Thierry by 9 the following morning, which was not difficult because men like Thierry always believed their obscurity made them safe. Thierry was operating out of a storage unit in Anjou that he used for his various small-time enterprises, none of which were going to present a problem much longer. Dominic did not go himself. He made a phone call from his study while drinking his morning coffee, and what was communicated in that call settled the matter entirely. By Friday, Thierry had left Montreal. He would not be coming back. His network had been dissolved by a combination of financial pressure and social consequences that made continuing in that line of work in that city effectively impossible. Rourke handled the communication that needed to be communicated in the particular way Rourke handled things, and the debt Lena had been carrying since last winter was erased with a wire transfer that Dominic processed from his laptop and did not mention. He mentioned none of this to Lena directly. What he told her was, "It's been resolved. You don't need to worry about him again." She was in the kitchen when he said it, making Éva's breakfast. She went very still for a moment. Then she set down a spatula, turned around, and looked at him with an expression that contained more complexity than he had words for. Relief, and something frightened, and something grateful, and something she was clearly trying to keep in check. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said, "I did." She nodded once, pressing her lips together. She turned back to the stove. "Vincent," she started, and then stopped and corrected herself. "Dominic." He waited. "Thank you," she said simply. He stood at the kitchen doorway for a moment. He was not a man who felt things slowly or with uncertainty. He had felt most things in his life with the same decisive clarity with which he moved through rooms. What he felt looking at Lena Marsh, at the set of her shoulders and the slight flush on her neck, and the particular steadiness she maintained even in moments designed to undo steadiness, was not slow or uncertain at all. It was, in fact, the most certain he had felt about anything in over a year. That evening, after Éva had been tucked in and kissed goodnight, a ritual Lena had established that now included 3 specific songs, the wooden cow, and a conversation with the mayor about the week's municipal priorities. Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway again. Lena was making tea. She looked up. He crossed the kitchen and stopped close enough that she could see the line where his jaw met his throat, the particular exhaustion in his eyes that she had noticed weeks ago and recognized as something deeper than tiredness. He reached up and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face with a gentleness that seemed almost to surprise him. "You have flour on your cheek again," he said. She hadn't been baking. They both knew she hadn't been baking. She looked up at him. "Dominic," she said. He kissed her, not tentatively, not with the hesitation of a man who is unsure. He kissed her like someone crossing a threshold he had been standing at for weeks, with both hands, with the full weight of everything that had been accumulating in all the quiet moments he'd spent in doorways watching her. She kissed him back. She had spent 26 years being the kind of person rooms forgot, and in his arms she was not invisible, not overlooked, not too much of one thing and not enough of another. She was seen. She was held. She was, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, entirely herself, and entirely enough. In the months that followed, Outremont noticed, in the way that closed worlds notice things, that Dominic Carreño had changed. He was still precise, still formidable, still the kind of man whose phone calls ended conversations in other rooms. But there was a different quality to him now, a stillness at the center of the storm that hadn't been there before, a readiness to come home. The household ran on warmth now, threaded through with the smell of cardamom financiers and the sound of a small girl conducting important municipal business with a wooden cow named Biscuit. Rourke, who had worked for Dominic for 9 years and considered himself an accurate reader of situations, had bought a bag of pecans at the market last week without being asked and left them on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "for the tarts." And Éva, who had once locked a certified childcare professional in a coat closet for 40 minutes, who had bitten one person and reduced 3 others to tears. Éva, who had simply known, from the first moment on the sitting room rug, what everyone else had needed weeks to understand. Slept peacefully every night, with the wooden cow at the foot of her bed and her small hands curled open, the way children sleep when they finally feel safe.